My name is Ian. Before you hear my story, I want you to know I'm not a vindictive person. I'm a process guy. For 25 years, my entire professional life was built around a simple, unshakable principle. You follow the process, you check the boxes, and everyone goes home safe at the end of their shift. It's not glamorous. It doesn't get you on the cover of a business magazine, but it lets you sleep at night. Or at least it used to. If you've ever had a boss who valued a spreadsheet more than a human life, or if you've ever been told your experience was a liability instead of an asset, then I think you'll understand what happened next. Pull up a chair, and let me tell you how it all fell apart, and how I learned that sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is to let it break completely. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments if any of this sounds familiar. It all ended in an office that smelled of lemon-scented cleaner and quiet desperation. My plant supervisor, Todd, sat behind a desk that was far too large for him, a slab of dark wood he'd ordered to signal an authority he hadn't earned. He was trying to look imposing, leaning back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers like a caricature of a CEO from a bad movie. But his eye was twitching, a tiny, almost imperceptible flutter in his left eyelid that gave away the panic bubbling just beneath his slick, MBA-honed veneer. I stood on the other side of the desk, my hands loose at my sides. I wasn't angry. The anger had burned out of me days ago, leaving behind something colder, heavier, something like resolve. He said my name, Ian, stretching it out, trying to make it sound like he was disappointed in a wayward son. It was one of his favorite little power plays, the condescending familiarity. I've known Todd for 2 years. 2 years versus the 25 I had poured into that plant. I'd started there right out of trade school, sweeping floors and learning the machinery from the inside out. I had grease under my fingernails that was older than his business degree. He cleared his throat. The final report is in. Ian, corporate is very pleased with our uptime this quarter. Very pleased. We're leading the region in efficiency metrics. I just nodded. I knew the metrics. I also knew the cost. It was a cost measured in risks, in near misses, in the silent, creeping dread that had started to permeate the plant floor. I have to say, he continued, his smile not reaching that twitching eye, your attitude lately has been a drag on morale. You've been resistant to the new operational paradigms, resistant to change. Paradigm, that was one of his words. He had a whole lexicon of them. Synergy, optimization, lean methodology. Words he used to obscure the simple, brutal reality of what he was doing, running a complex, dangerous industrial facility on a shoestring budget to make his quarterly bonus look good. I didn't respond to his accusation. I just looked at him, letting the silence hang in the air. I asked a simple question. Todd, have you had a chance to look at the latest pressure readings from containment valve 3B? His posture stiffened. The faux paternal disappointment vanished, replaced by a flash of genuine irritation. We've been over this, Ian. Valve 3B is within operational tolerances. It's in the report. I signed off on it myself. I know you did, I said, my voice level. That's the problem. The report says it passed a full diagnostic and manual inspection. It says the seals were checked, and the primary gasket was replaced. He spread his hands wide. So, it's documented. We're compliant. End of story. I took a small step closer to his battleship of a desk. I know the maintenance schedule, Todd. I wrote most of it. I also know our parts inventory. We haven't had a replacement gasket for a 3B series valve in stock for 8 months. The one you claim was installed was never ordered. The diagnostic was never run. The work was never done. But the report was filed, and your signature is at the bottom of it. The twitch in his eye went into overdrive. The carefully constructed mask of the competent manager dissolved, and for the first time I saw the weaselly, terrified man underneath. He had been hiding safety reports for months, not just misfiling them or forgetting them. He had been actively, willfully falsifying them, taking the inspection forms, having a junior tech pencil whip the results, and then signing his name to the lie. all to avoid the cost and downtime of replacing a single faulty pressure valve. A valve that, if it failed, would vent superheated steam at over 800 psi into a workspace, often occupied by half a dozen people. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. His face was turning a blotchy red. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "That's a serious accusation." "It's a serious valve," I replied. "This is what I'm talking about," he spat, his voice rising. "This is the insubordination. You're undermining my authority. You're questioning my decisions in front of the team. You're a relic, Ian. Your way of doing things is slow, it's expensive, and it's over. This plant is a business, not a charity. We have to make tough choices to stay competitive." "The tough choice you made was to gamble with other people's lives for a bonus," I said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. That was it. That was the line. He stabbed a button on his desk phone. "Susan, get HR in here now." He thought he'd won. He looked at me with a triumphant sneer as the HR manager, a nervous woman named Carol, who always seemed to be apologizing for her own existence, scurried in with a folder. He thought he was cutting out a cancer of dissent. He thought he was getting rid of the one old guy who wouldn't get with the program. He sat back down, smoothing his tie, the picture of control once more, as Carol read a pre-written statement about my failure to align with management directives and creating a hostile work environment. They had a box ready for me, a standard-issue cardboard box for my 25 years of service, my coffee mug with the faded company logo, a picture of my wife Sarah and our kids when they were small, the small plaque I'd gotten for 15 years of perfect safety. I placed each item into the box with deliberate care. I didn't look at Todd. I didn't look at Carol. I looked out the window, at the smokestacks painting the sky, the place I had considered a second home. Todd thought he'd gotten rid of the problem. He watched me walk out, escorted by a security guard I'd known since he was a teenager, and I could feel the smug satisfaction radiating off him. He didn't know the problem wasn't me. The problem was the truth, and he didn't know that I had already put the truth in an envelope. He didn't know that for the last 2 weeks, I hadn't just been angry, I had been busy. He didn't know I had already mailed copies of every single one of his suppressed, falsified reports to the regional OSHA office. But that wasn't the masterstroke. He didn't know that my package also included a copy of the company's internal compliance calendar, which detailed the schedule for their upcoming surprise inspections. He thought he was a strategic genius playing corporate chess. He had no idea he was a pawn in a much simpler game, one where the rules were written in federal ink. When the inspectors arrive tomorrow, they will know exactly which filing cabinet to open, exactly which valve to test, and whose signature to look for on every damning page. The drive home was the longest 20 minutes of my life. I kept the radio off. The silence in my truck was immense, broken only by the hum of the tires on the asphalt. I passed the familiar landmarks, the diner where the night shift guys grabbed coffee, the Little League field where my son hit his first home run, and they all felt like scenes from someone else's life. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I couldn't face Sarah yet, not with this hollowed-out feeling in my chest. I drove past my exit and headed for the scenic overlook on the East Ridge, a small patch of gravel where teenagers went to park. From there you could see the whole industrial basin spread out below, a sprawling map of my entire adult life. I put the truck in park and just sat there, my hands still on the wheel, the cardboard box of my career sitting on the passenger seat like a silent accusation. Down below, the plant was a hive of activity. I could see the glint of windshields in the employee lot, the plumes of clean white steam rising from the cooling towers. From this distance it looked peaceful, orderly, a well-oiled machine. But I knew better. I knew about the decay in its heart. I knew about valve 3B. The anger I thought had burned out was trying to claw its way back up, but it couldn't. It was being suffocated by a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight. 25 years. I'd given them my youth, my back, my mind. I'd missed school plays and anniversary dinners because of a sudden shutdown or a critical repair. I'd mentored dozens of young workers, teaching them not just how to do the job, but how to do it safely, how to respect the immense power and danger we worked with every single day. I did it because I believed in the place. I believed in the work. It wasn't just a job. It was a craft. It was a responsibility. The old man, Mr. Henderson, the founder, he used to walk the floor every single day. He knew every worker by name. He'd ask about your family. He'd stop and inspect a weld, not because he didn't trust you, but because he respected the work. His motto was simple: the machine builds the product, but the people build the company. Then he retired. His kids had no interest in the business, so it was sold to a private equity firm, and they installed a board of directors who lived 1,000 miles away and saw the plant not as a legacy, but as a line item on a balance sheet. That's when Todd arrived. He strode in with his shiny shoes and his binder full of buzzwords, talking about right-sizing and optimizing workflows. He saw the plant's robust safety protocols, the ones Mr. Henderson and I had built over decades, not as a point of pride, but as a source of inefficiency. He saw redundancies and saw waste. He didn't see the lives they were designed to protect. The first clash came 6 months into his tenure. We had a scheduled overhaul for one of the primary smelting lines. It was a 2-week shutdown, planned a year in advance. It was expensive, but necessary. Todd tried to cancel it. He called me into his office, the same office I was fired from, and showed me a chart. This shutdown, he said, pointing with a gold pen, is going to put us in the red for the quarter. We push it to next year, we beat our targets, and everyone gets a nice bonus. I told him no. I explained in calm, simple terms that the refractory lining in the furnace was approaching its end of life. Pushing it was not a risk, it was a guarantee of failure. A catastrophic one. I didn't raise my voice, I just laid out the facts. I told him I would not sign off on it, and if he overrode me, my formal objection would be noted in the official record. He backed down that time, hissing something about me not being a team player, but the battle lines were drawn. After that, he started working around me. He'd approve minor deviations from procedure, cut back on training hours, and delay non-critical maintenance. He called it agile management. I called it what it was, a slow, methodical erosion of every safeguard we had. He was like a man pulling bricks from the foundation of a skyscraper to sell them for scrap, proud of his profit margin, while ignoring the groaning of the steel above. The issue with valve 3B was the culmination of it all. It was an old American-made valve, a beast of forged steel and brass fittings. Newer models were more efficient, sure, but this one was reliable if you maintained it. It was part of a secondary coolant loop, a fail-safe system. If the primary loop failed, 3B was what stood between a controlled shutdown and a runaway pressure event. I had been petitioning for its replacement for 3 years. The budget was finally approved the year before Todd arrived. He canceled the purchase order on his first day. An unnecessary capital expenditure, his memo said. Instead, he put it on an enhanced inspection schedule, but he wouldn't authorize the overtime for the maintenance crew to actually do the work properly. So the reports started coming back. Perfect. Too perfect. A valve that old, under that much stress, always had minor fluctuations, minor seal wear. It was never perfect. I got suspicious. I started my own quiet investigation. I'd walk the floor after my shift, checking the logs. I talked to Jimmy, a young technician on the maintenance crew. He was a good kid, but scared. He had a new baby at home. He eventually confessed, his voice barely a whisper, that Todd had been pressuring him to pre-fill the reports. He just said to make it look good, Ian, Jimmy told me, his eyes pleading for understanding. He said the plant's future depended on us showing good numbers. Todd would then co-sign the falsified report, lending it his authority, burying the lie under a layer of management approval. Why didn't I go straight to the top? I tried. I sent 3 separate emails to Todd's boss, a regional VP named Richards, outlining my concerns. The first 2 were ignored completely. The third one got a response, not from Richards, but from Todd himself. He called me into his office, a smug look on his face. Going over my head, Ian. That's not how we do things here. It turned out Richards was the one who had hired Todd, They were from the same investment firm. Todd was his golden boy, his proof that the new way worked. Complaining to Richards was like complaining to a father about his favorite son. It was a dead end. I could have quit. God, I thought about it, but I felt this crushing sense of responsibility. I knew every nut and bolt in that place. I knew the families of the men and women who worked the floor. Quitting felt like abandoning them. It felt like letting Todd win. So I stayed, fighting my quiet war, documenting everything, hoping for an opening, a chance to make someone listen before it was too late. My wife, Sarah, saw the toll it was taking. The sleepless nights, the way I'd stare into space at the dinner table. She never pushed. She just made sure the coffee was hot in the morning and would put a hand on my shoulder as I headed out the door. "Be safe," she'd say. It was a prayer. The catalyst, the thing that finally broke my loyalty, happened a week before I was fired. There was a small pressure surge in the system, not from 3B, but from an adjacent line. It caused 3B to shudder, a deep groaning sound that echoed through the pipes. The needle on its analog gauge, one I had insisted on keeping as a backup to the digital sensors, jumped deep into the red for a full 3 seconds before settling back down. For those 3 seconds, every operator on that floor froze. I saw a young woman, Maria, not much older than my own daughter, look at the valve with sheer terror in her eyes. Nothing blew. The system held, but it was a warning shot, a glimpse into the abyss. That night, I went home and couldn't even look at my wife. I just went into my study and sat in the dark. I had been trying to fix the problem from within, playing by rules that my opponent had already thrown out the window. I was being a good soldier in a war that had already been lost. That's when I realized my duty wasn't to the company anymore. It wasn't to the faceless board or the smug manager in the big office. My duty was to Maria and Jimmy and the 100 other people who walked through those gates every day, trusting that someone was watching their back. The decision, when it came, felt less like a choice and more like a physical law, like gravity. I had to act. The next morning, before work, I went to a copy shop. I had a briefcase with me, filled with the documents I had been collecting for months, not just the falsified reports. I had copies of the maintenance crew's real handwritten logs, which they kept in a binder in their workshop, showing no work had been done. I had printouts from the purchasing system, showing the gaskets were never ordered. I had the SCADA data logs from the control room, a stream of raw numbers that, when analyzed, showed the valve's performance degrading steadily over the last year. And I had my emails to Richards and Todd's dismissive replies. I was building a case, brick by damning brick. Looking at the steam rising from the plant, I finally felt the cold grief recede, replaced by a crystalline, diamond-hard certainty. I hadn't been fired for insubordination. I had been fired for integrity, and they had made a profound, catastrophic miscalculation. They thought my loyalty was to them. They never understood that my loyalty was, and always had been, to the safety of the people inside. I started the truck, the engine turning over with a familiar rumble. It was time to go home. Sarah would be worried. I had a story to tell her, and a storm to prepare for. The plan wasn't born from a single flash of inspiration. It was assembled, piece by piece, in the quiet hours of the night in my home study, fueled by black coffee and a methodical rage. A man like Todd, a man who lives by spreadsheets and buzzwords, sees the world in terms of assets and liabilities. He saw me as a liability, an expensive, aging, resistant to change liability. The mistake he made was in failing to properly inventory my assets. He didn't understand that my true value wasn't on the company payroll. It was in the trust I had built over a quarter of a century. It was in the institutional knowledge I carried in my head, and it was in the simple fact that I, unlike him, understood how things actually worked. My first and most important asset was my primary ally, Dave Miller. Dave was the lead maintenance technician, a wiry man with hands as tough as leather and a mind as sharp as a laser cutter. I'd hired him 15 years ago. He was a classic old-school mechanic who believed in fixing things right or not at all. Todd treated him and his crew like glorified janitors, dismissing their expertise and constantly overriding their professional judgment. This disrespect had fostered a fierce, quiet loyalty between Dave's crew and me, because I was the only one in management who ever fought for them, who made sure they had the right tools, the right training, and the right amount of time to do their jobs without cutting corners. 2 weeks before I was fired, after the pressure surge incident, I had called Dave to my office and closed the door. I laid it all out for him, my suspicions about the reports, my fears about Valve 3B. I didn't have to ask him for help. I just showed him the data. His face, normally weathered and stoic, hardened into a mask of cold fury. "That son of a bitch," he whispered, looking at Todd's signature on a falsified inspection sheet. "He's going to kill someone." From that moment on, he was my inside man. He got me copies of the maintenance crew's real work logs, the ones they kept in a greasy 3-ring binder, a parallel set of books that told the truth. But Dave gave me something even more valuable, the key to the whole operation. I knew I had to get the evidence to OSHA, but a complaint from a disgruntled employee, even with documentation, could get tied up in bureaucracy for months. I needed to guarantee immediate action. I needed them to walk in the door knowing exactly where to look. I asked Dave if there was any way to know when the next plant-wide inspection was scheduled. He got a grim smile on his face. He told me that because his team had to prepare certain areas for environmental and equipment audits, he had read-only access to the corporate compliance calendar, a document Todd probably didn't even know existed. He printed it for me, and there it was, a 2-day window for a routine, unannounced OSHA safety audit, scheduled for the day after my confrontation with Todd. The timing was a gift from the gods of industrial justice. My second asset was foresight. I knew that firing me would be Todd's solution. It's the classic move of an insecure manager. Eliminate the person who is highlighting the problem, and the problem ceases to exist. So, I prepared for it. The day before I confronted him, I spent my lunch break not in the cafeteria, but at a 24-hour copy and shipping center. I assembled the package. It was a work of art, if I do say so myself. I didn't just dump a pile of papers on them. I organized it like a legal brief. I started with a cover letter, a single page, clearly and calmly explaining who I was, my qualifications, and the imminent danger posed by Valve 3B. I referenced the specific OSHA statutes I believed were being violated. I'd spent hours researching them regarding willful negligence and the falsification of safety records. Behind the letter, I arranged the evidence in a clear narrative sequence. First, the official falsified reports with Todd's signature highlighted in yellow. Next, the corresponding pages from the maintenance crew's real logs showing no work was done. Then, the printouts from the purchasing system, proving no parts were ordered. After that, the SCADA data, which I had translated from raw numbers into a simple, terrifying graph showing the valve's pressure tolerance degrading over time. Finally, I included copies of my ignored emails to the regional VP, Richards, establishing a clear pattern of management being warned and failing to act. I was not just giving them a problem, I was giving them the entire solved case, gift-wrapped and tied with a bow. I made 2 copies of this dossier. One went into a large manila envelope. I addressed it not to the generic OSHA whistleblower hotline, but directly to the regional director by name, a name I had found on their official website. Sending it to a specific person makes it harder to ignore. It creates a chain of personal responsibility. I sent it via certified mail with return receipt requested. A physical package has a weight, a gravity that an email lacks. The second copy I saved on an encrypted USB drive, which I kept in my pocket. My third, and perhaps most subtle asset, was my reputation. Todd saw me as a dinosaur, but the people on the floor, the engineers, the office staff, they saw me as the guy who had been there forever, the guy who knew the answer. People like Maria, a sharp woman who worked in accounts payable. A week before the end, I had stopped by her desk under the pretense of asking about a vendor payment. We chatted for a bit, and I casually mentioned that I was trying to track down the invoice for the last major service on Valve 3B. She tapped a few keys, her brow furrowed. "That's funny, Ian," she'd said. "I don't see any record of that. No purchase order, no invoice, nothing. Are you sure you have the right valve?" I thanked her and told her I must have gotten it wrong, but the seed was planted. Maria was smart. She knew something was off. When the news of my firing broke, she would be one of the first to connect the dots. I wasn't just building a case for OSHA. I was building a consensus among the people who mattered, the ones who kept the plant running. The night before the confrontation, I sat with Sarah in our kitchen. The package was in the mail. The plan was in motion. There was no going back. I told her everything, every detail of Todd's negligence, every step of my plan. She listened patiently, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea. When I was finished, the silence in the room was heavy. I expected fear, or maybe even anger that I had risked my job, our security. Instead, she just reached across the table and put her hand on mine. "I'm proud of you, Ian," she said, her voice firm. "You're doing what you've always done. You're keeping people safe. Mr. Henderson would be proud of you, too." Her words were like a shield. They armored me for what was to come. I had spent so many years being the company man, believing that loyalty to the institution was the highest virtue. But the institution was gone. It was just a brand name owned by a holding company, run by men like Todd and Richards. My loyalty, I finally understood, had been misplaced. Sarah's simple, unwavering faith reminded me where it truly belonged, to the principles I had built my life on, and to the people who depended on them. The next morning, when I walked into Todd's office to confront him, I wasn't an employee going to see his boss. I was a man with a purpose, walking into a trap that I myself had set. He thought he was presiding over my execution. He had no idea he was the one on the chopping block. The day after they fired me, I woke up at my usual time, 5:30 a.m. For 25 years, that was the time my internal clock was set to. The house was dark and quiet. For a moment, I had the disorienting feeling that I was late for work. I swung my legs out of bed, my feet hitting the cool wood floor, and then it all came flooding back. The box, Todd's sneer, the drive home. I wasn't late. I was unemployed. A strange sense of calm washed over me. There was no rush, no shift briefing to prepare for, no safety logs to review. My role in the drama was, for the moment, over. I had lit the fuse. Now all I could do was wait for the explosion. Sarah found me in the kitchen an hour later, staring out the window at the rising sun, a mug of coffee in my hand. She put her arms around me from behind and rested her chin on my shoulder. "What's on the agenda for the newly retired?" she asked softly. I said, taking a sip of coffee. "I'm going to finally fix that leaky faucet in the guest bathroom." And that's what I did. I spent the morning in a state of deliberate, focused mundanity. I went to the hardware store. I bought a wrench and some new O-rings. I laid out my tools on a towel on the bathroom floor and methodically disassembled the faucet, cleaning each piece, replacing the worn parts, putting it all back together. The simple, honest work felt good. It was a problem with a clear solution, cause and effect. You find the fault, you apply the fix. It was everything my job was supposed to be, but hadn't been for a very long time. My phone buzzed in my pocket around 10:30 a.m. It was Dave. I wiped my hands on a rag and answered. "They're here," he said, his voice low and tight. There was a lot of noise in the background, the familiar clang and hum of the plant. "How many?" I asked. "3 of them, 2 men and a woman. They look official." They walked right past the front desk, flashed their badges at the security guard, and asked for Todd by name. They didn't ask for a tour. They didn't ask for the plant manager, just Todd. I could picture the scene perfectly. Todd, in the middle of his morning coffee, being told he had visitors from the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the sudden cold knot forming in his stomach. "He's taking them to the conference room now," Dave continued. "He's doing his usual song and dance, the big welcoming smile. He has no idea what's coming, Ian, no idea." "Keep me posted," I said, and hung up. I finished my work on the faucet, tightened the last connection, and turned the water back on. Not a single drop. Perfect. I was cleaning up my tools when my phone buzzed again. It was just after noon. Dave. Again. "It's happening," he said, and this time I could hear the barely suppressed excitement in his voice. They weren't in the conference room for more than 10 minutes. They came out, and one of them was holding a manila envelope, looked just like the one you showed me. They walked with Todd straight to the maintenance archive room. Todd was trying to steer them toward his office, but they weren't having it. They knew exactly where they were going. The maintenance archive room was a small, windowless space in the basement, filled with gray metal filing cabinets. It was where decades of records were stored. It was also where Todd kept the current falsified inspection logs. Todd's face is as white as a sheet, Dave went on, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He had to fumble with his keys for almost a minute to get the door open. His hands were shaking so bad. The lead inspector, the woman, she pointed to a specific cabinet. She told him to open it. She didn't ask. She told him. Then she pulled a document out of her envelope, one of your copies, and held it up. She asked him if this was the official record for Valve 3B. Todd just sort of gurgled. He couldn't get a word out. He just nodded. I closed my eyes, savoring the image. The arrogant, untouchable manager, reduced to a stammering, sweaty mess, cornered by his own lies in a dusty basement. And then, Dave said, his voice electric, she said the magic words. She said, "Good, now show me yours." She knew. She knew they were in there. Todd opened the drawer, and she pulled out the file. She laid his falsified report right next to your copy on top of the cabinet. They were identical. She tapped his signature on the page. "Mr. Donovan," she said, "is this your signature?" Donovan. Todd Donovan. Even his name sounded like it was trying too hard. He tried to bluster, Dave said with a chuckle. Said something about clerical errors and outdated forms. The inspectors just looked at him. They didn't say a word. Then the other one of the men, he just said, "Let's go see the valve." The next call came an hour later. It was chaos. When the inspectors got to the plant floor with Todd in tow, they didn't just look at Valve 3B. They had brought their own gear, a portable high-pressure testing unit and an ultrasonic thickness gauge. They cleared the area, ordering the operators to a safe distance. Dave and his crew were told to assist. They hooked up their rig, Dave explained, speaking quickly. Todd was trying to object, talking about production schedules and how this was an unscheduled shutdown. The lead inspector just looked at him and said, "Mr. Donovan, this area is now under federal jurisdiction. You can either cooperate or you can be charged with obstruction. Your choice." He shut up after that. They ran the test. They bypassed the valve's internal sensors and subjected it to a controlled pressure buildup, simulating a real-world coolant surge. It was supposed to hold steady up to 1,200 psi. It didn't even get to 900, Dave said, his voice grim. There was this god-awful screaming sound like tearing metal, and then a seam on the main housing split. Not a catastrophic explosion, thank God. But it blew a jet of pressurized water clear across the catwalk. If we hadn't cleared the area, Ian, if someone had been standing there, he didn't have to finish. We both knew. The immediate aftermath was pandemonium. The test failure triggered a full plant alert. Production was halted. The regional VP, Richards, was on site within the hour, his face like thunder. Dave described watching through the workshop window as Richards absolutely eviscerated Todd in his glass-walled office, his hands chopping the air, his voice inaudible but his rage perfectly clear to the entire plant. By the end of the day, the story was all over the plant. Ian, the old safety guy they just fired, the surprise inspection the very next day, the inspectors who knew exactly what to look for. No one was stupid. They all put it together. I wasn't a disgruntled employee. I was a whistleblower, and I hadn't just been proven right. I had been proven right in the most dramatic, public, and undeniable way possible. My phone started buzzing with texts from my old colleagues, just short messages. "Holy crap, you legend, thank you." I sat on my back porch as the sun began to set, the leaky faucet a distant memory. The quiet satisfaction I felt was immense. It wasn't the petty joy of revenge. It was the profound, bone-deep relief of a disaster averted. Todd hadn't just been exposed. His entire philosophy, the reckless, corner-cutting ethos he represented, had been laid bare for all to see. He had gambled with their lives, and he had lost. The silence I had deployed was over. The noisy, chaotic, and expensive consequences were just beginning for him. The initial shockwave of the OSHA inspection was just the beginning. The second wave, the one that would truly cripple the company, began not with a bang, but with a quiet phone call. It was 2 days after the inspection. I was in my workshop, sketching out plans for a new set of bookshelves for Sarah, when my phone rang. It was Dave. "I quit," he said, without any preamble. "You what?" "I handed in my notice this morning, effective immediately. I told them I was using my accrued vacation time for my 2 weeks. I cited an unsafe work environment. Richards tried to talk me out of it, offered me a 10% raise." "What did you say?" I asked, a slow smile spreading across my face. "I told him 10% of zero is still zero, because that's the chance I'm giving my life working in this death trap." Then I told him to have a nice day and walked out. The look on his face, Ian, priceless. He paused, and then his voice turned serious. "So you know anyone who's hiring a top-tier maintenance lead with 15 years of experience in high-pressure systems?" I laughed. "Let me make some calls, Dave. I think your resume will be in high demand." Dave was just the first domino. His departure sent a powerful signal through the plant. Dave was a lifer, a guy everyone thought would be there until he retired. If he was jumping ship, the ship must be well and truly sinking. The next day, 2 of our best certified welders, the guys who did all the high-pressure pipe fitting, also quit. They were followed by 3 of the most experienced control room operators. Then Maria from accounting, the one who knew the invoices were missing, put in her notice. Each of them, in their exit interviews, cited the same reason: a loss of confidence in the company's commitment to safety. It was a talent exodus, a brain drain of the very people who held the place together with their skill and institutional knowledge. It wasn't something I had organized or even encouraged. It was a spontaneous, organic reaction to the truth I had revealed. These were smart, capable people, and they understood a fundamental principle that men like Todd and Richards could never grasp. Competence isn't cheap until you lose it. The company had saved a few $1,000s by not replacing a valve, and in return they were now losing decades of irreplaceable experience. The panic at the corporate level must have been immense. A failing OSHA inspection was bad enough, but a mass walkout of critical personnel was a 5-alarm fire. That's when my phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed the plant's main number. I let it ring for a moment, then answered. "Ian," a voice said. It was smooth, controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. It was Richards, the regional VP. "Mr. Richards," I said, my voice neutral. "Ian, listen," he began, launching into a well-rehearsed speech. "There has been a terrible, terrible misunderstanding. Todd Donovan acted unilaterally. He was not operating with corporate approval, and his actions are a profound betrayal of our company's values. He was throwing Todd under the bus so hard the tires were squealing. We've suspended him, of course, pending a full investigation. He's finished here." I stayed silent, letting him talk. It's a powerful tool, silence. It makes people want to fill it, and they often do so by revealing more than they intend. The point is, Ian, we were wrong. I was wrong not to listen to your concerns. You were right all along. You've always been one of our most valued employees. Your dedication, your experience, it's invaluable. I almost laughed. A week ago, my experience was a liability. Now, it was invaluable. Funny how that works. "We want you to come back," he said, getting to the point. "We want to make this right. We'll expunge the termination from your record. Full back pay, of course, and a promotion. We're creating a new position, Regional Director of Safety and Compliance. It's yours. You'd report directly to me. You'd have full authority to write your own budget, to implement whatever protocols you see fit. You can name your price, Ian. Just tell me what it will take to bring you back." It was a desperate, panicked offer. They weren't offering me a job because they valued my integrity. They were offering it because they were hemorrhaging talent, their reputation was in tatters, and they were staring down the barrel of what would likely be millions of dollars in OSHA fines and mandatory remediation. They needed me as a symbol. They needed to be able to tell the remaining employees and the regulators that Ian is back. Everything is under control. I was no longer a person to them, I was a public relations strategy. I let the silence stretch for a long moment, picturing him in his expensive office, sweating into the phone. I thought about the years of being ignored, of having my expertise dismissed. I thought about the fear in young Maria's eyes during the pressure surge. I thought about Todd's smug face as he fired me. Finally, I spoke, my voice calm and even. "Mr. Richards," I said, "a few days ago, you had a man who was, for all intents and purposes, already your director of safety. He worked for a fair salary, he did his job diligently, and he tried to warn you about a problem. You didn't listen to him. You allowed your subordinate to fire him for doing that job. Now the house is on fire, and you want to hire him back as the fire chief, and are willing to pay him anything he asks." He started to speak, but I cut him off. "My price, Mr. Richards, isn't something you can put on a spreadsheet. My price is a workplace that doesn't put quarterly profits ahead of human lives. My price is a management team that listens to its experts and respects the people who do the actual work. From where I'm standing, it doesn't look like your company can afford that price." The silence on his end was absolute. I don't think he had ever been spoken to like that. "So thank you for the offer," I concluded, "but I'm not interested. I wish you the best of luck with your investigation." And then I hung up the phone. It felt like closing a heavy steel door. The power had shifted completely. They had held all the cards, the job, the salary, the authority. But by revealing the truth, I had shown them that their cards were worthless. Their power was an illusion, built on a foundation of lies and disrespect. My power, on the other hand, was real. It was built on competence, trust, and a reputation I had spent 25 years earning, and it was not, and never would be, for sale. The vindication, when it came, wasn't a single dramatic moment. It was a series of quiet clicks, like the tumblers of a massive lock falling into place. The final confrontation I had imagined, a face-to-face with a humble Todd or a groveling Richards, never happened. And I realized I didn't need it. My victory wasn't personal, it was procedural. The system I had set in motion was working its cold, impartial logic, and I was content to be an observer. A week after I turned down Richards's desperate offer, I got a call from a man named Frank Peterson. He was the CEO of Sterling Manufacturing, our biggest competitor. Sterling was a company I had always admired from afar. They had a reputation for being innovators, but also for having an almost fanatical devotion to safety and quality. Their plants were cleaner, their safety record was impeccable, and they were known for retaining their employees for decades. They were, in short, everything my old company had ceased to be. "Ian," Frank said, his voice a friendly baritone, "I hope you don't mind the call. I got your number from Dave Miller. He speaks very highly of you." It turned out Dave, after quitting, had immediately sent his resume to Sterling. They had hired him on the spot. "We've been following the news about your old place," Frank continued, "and frankly, it's a damn shame what happened over there. It gives the whole industry a black eye. But it also got us thinking. We're expanding. With 2 new plants scheduled to open in the next 3 years, we want to build a centralized corporate-level safety auditing division, a team of experts who can go into any of our facilities, provide an independent analysis, and work with the local teams to design safety into the process from the ground up, not just tack it on as an afterthought." I listened, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "We don't want a pencil pusher or a bureaucrat to run it," he said. "We want someone who has lived it, someone who has been on the floor, who understands the machinery, and who has unimpeachable integrity. We want someone who has proven they're willing to stand up for what's right, even at great personal cost. My board and I agree, Ian, that person is you." The offer was staggering. It wasn't just a job, it was a mission. It was the chance to take a lifetime of experience and apply it on a massive scale, to build something lasting, something that would protect hundreds, if not thousands of workers. It was the absolute antithesis of what Todd had been doing. He had been focused on cutting corners to create short-term profit. This was an investment in people to create long-term value. I accepted the position. My first official act as Director of Corporate Safety for Sterling Manufacturing was to offer jobs to two of the best certified welders I knew. Then I called a brilliant control room operator. Then I called Maria from accounting and offered her a position as a compliance analyst for my new division. One by one, I reassembled the team of competent, principled professionals that my old company had so foolishly discarded. We weren't just colleagues, we were refugees, survivors of a toxic corporate culture, now given the chance to build the kind of workplace we had always deserved. The news about my old plant came in trickles, mostly from industry newsletters and the local business journal. The OSHA fines were, as predicted, crippling. They were cited for dozens of willful violations, the most serious category, and the final bill ran into the high seven figures. They were forced into a mandatory top-to-bottom safety overhaul, overseen by a federally appointed monitor. The plant was shut down for nearly 2 months, costing them their biggest contracts and destroying their reputation in the market. Todd Donovan was fired, of course, but it went further than that. The district attorney's office, prompted by OSHA's findings of willful endangerment, had opened a criminal investigation into his conduct. His signature on those falsified reports was the nail in his coffin. The last I heard, he was facing felony charges. Richards, the VP who had enabled him, was forced into a quiet, unceremonious early retirement by the board, a corporate euphemism for being fired in a way that avoids a lawsuit. The private equity firm that owned the company, seeing their asset turn into a massive liability, sold it for pennies on the dollar to a scrap metal consortium. The plant where I had spent 25 years of my life was being dismantled. I felt a brief pang of sadness for the place itself, for the memories. But the building was just steel and concrete. The soul of the place, the good people who had made it run, were safe. Many of them were now with me, at Sterling. We were building something new. One day, I was walking the floor of a Sterling facility with Dave, reviewing the schematics for a new coolant system. He pointed to a gleaming, state-of-the-art pressure release valve, triple redundant, and monitored by a dozen sensors. "Look at that thing," he said with a grin. "It's beautiful." "It's a good valve, Dave," I said. "It's not about the valve, Ian," he replied, turning to me. "It's about the fact that nobody had to fight to get it installed. That's the difference." He was right. That was the new reality. That was the vindication. Not the failure of my enemies, but the success of a principle. I wasn't on a throne of my own making. I was just back on the ground, doing the work, surrounded by people who understood that the most important thing you can build in any business isn't a product, it's trust. So here I am, in my new office, which is spacious and clean, but more often than not, I'm out on a plant floor somewhere, talking to the people who do the real work. On my desk, I don't have a lot of personal effects, just a picture of Sarah and the kids, and one other small framed photo. It's a picture of Valve 3B, taken by Dave the day it was finally cut out and sent for scrap. It's ugly, corroded, and scarred, a testament to neglect. It's there to remind me of what happens when people in power forget what's truly important. It's a reminder that a signature on a piece of paper isn't just a bureaucratic act, it's a promise. A promise to be competent, a promise to be diligent, a promise to be honest. When I look back on it all, I realize this wasn't really a story about revenge. Revenge is a hot, messy emotion. What I did was cold, methodical, and clean. It was an audit. I simply gathered the data, presented the facts, and allowed the system to correct itself. Todd and Richards weren't defeated by me. They were defeated by their own arrogance. They were defeated by the truth. They believed that their authority gave them the power to redefine reality, to say a valve was safe when it was failing, to say a report was true when it was a lie. But reality has a way of asserting itself. Gravity doesn't care about your job title. Physics doesn't respond to corporate spin. A faulty valve is a faulty valve, and a lie is a lie. no matter who signs off on it. They thought I was just an old hand, a dinosaur, stuck in my ways and resistant to change. They mistook my experience for stubbornness. They mistook my caution for fear. They fundamentally misunderstood the nature of my job. I wasn't there to make things go faster. I was there to make sure they didn't stop. Suddenly, and catastrophically, the institutional knowledge they saw as a liability was the company's immune system, and they fired it right before the infection took hold. There's a difference between a boss and a leader. A boss drives their employees. A leader guides them. A boss depends on authority. A leader depends on goodwill. A boss says go. A leader says let's go. Todd was a boss. He managed spreadsheets, and people were just numbers on them. The real leaders were the men and women on that floor, the ones who knew their jobs, cared about their work, and watched out for each other. All I did was give them the truth they needed to finally hold their bosses accountable. If you've ever been in a situation like this where you were overlooked, underestimated, or punished for doing the right thing, I want you to know that you're not alone. Competence is an asset, experience is valuable, and integrity is not a weakness. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one who holds all the cards. You just have to know when and how to play them. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, I'd appreciate it if you'd like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Let me know about your own experiences in the comments below. It's important to remember that these struggles are shared, and make sure you hit that subscribe button for more stories about when the so-called experts get taught a lesson by the people who actually know what they're doing. Take care and stay safe.